episode 5 of the Accountfully chat. Today we have Heath Johnson from Bera Wealth Advisors on. How you doing, Heath?
Hello, Brad.
All right, looking forward to chatting with you today, Heath. So he's a friend of mine in the Charleston area, and a CFP and certified financial planner slash wealth manager, and we've worked with Heath for over a decade. And I am excited about this chat. It's going to talk about some topics that we've never really touched on this chat. So before we kind of go down those topics, Heath, tell us a little bit about yourself, like what you do, where you're from, and what you do for your clients on a day-to-day basis.
Sure. I have been in some capacity with Northwestern Mutual for a little over 20 years, which makes me feel old. When I started, I was an intern in mid-Michigan, where I grew up, Brad's home state as well. And in 2008, I moved to Charleston. I think, when did we meet, Brad? Like 2012, 2000.
Around there. No,
It doesn't matter. Nobody cares.
LinkedIn message.
A long time ago, and before Brad had like 18 kids. But I moved to Charleston because in mid-Michigan, although I had a great growing up, there weren't palm trees and beaches and golf courses. And so my friend Mike was running our office here, and I came down for a study group meeting, which is kind of just like an excuse to drink in a cool city for 4 or 5 days. And all of my buddies are like, dude, you should move here. And Mike made it really easy for me to do that. He was in management at the time. And it was like the best decision of my life. And now today, I'm still affiliated with Northwestern Mutual. We have a private client group, which focuses more on fee-based financial planning. So as opposed to like commission-based, sales-based stuff, it's just pay me a fee and we'll build you a plan kind of thing. But that's called Bera Wealth Advisors. I've got a partner named Chris Kanos, and I've got 2 limited partners named Evan and Spencer. And we just work with families all over the country, mostly in the Southeast, doing, investment planning around retirement goals, education, etc. And so anyway, I've picked up all kinds of designations along the way. We were talking about it before the show, the alphabet soup after my name. But those are all, I guess, just sort of, spin-offs of the CFP designation, just in different areas like estate planning or planning for philanthropy, that sort of stuff. And anyway, it's all I've ever done except drive a forklift in mid-Michigan. And I love it because you get to talk to cool people all day.
Awesome. Great background, and looking forward to chatting. So our goal today, Heath, is I want us the listeners to basically kind of picture a small business owner, let's say a team of 5, runs a service-based company, let's say an accounting firm, runs it with his spouse or significant other, have a lot of plans on growing the business, hiring a bunch of people, expanding it, and try to become rich, while at the same time growing a family. So,
Brad, are you just trying to get some free advice here today? Is that what this is about?
I've gotten way too much advice for you. So, no, but I want to preface kind of that conversation so we could start with the person that's just starting a business, right? And understanding, maybe not even starting a business, but maybe starting a family first, but wants to become an entrepreneur. So I want to kind of go through the different things to think of along the way in terms of, your knowledge and expertise related to various insurances, the risks people should be aware of, financial planning, retirement planning, etc. But I guess before we even start with that, can you define, what does financial planning mean to you?
That's a great question. I think that what people imagine when they hear financial planning is like somebody with like 18 computer monitors and a lot of like charts and graphs and like stock market stuff. And I don't know. It's much maybe less exciting than that. I think about sort of quantifying goals, right? So pick a couple easy ones. Retirement. Like, well, you say like, I want to retire someday. That's okay. But a better goal might be to say that you want to be, retired or independent of work by the time you're 60 years old, meaning you need $10,000 per month after tax, inflation adjusted from somewhere in order to be able to do that, right? So someone's retirement objective, when you quantify it, might feel a little bit different than just I'd like to retire someday. Like helping people really define what that means, and I think crafting, a vision for where that person wants to be, where that family wants to be, or that business or whatever. And then you can sort of backfill with recommendations about the most efficient way to get from point A to point B. And, goals probably get a bit too much credit in financial planning. I mean, everybody likes the idea of goals, but I think transitions are probably more important. Everybody's born, everybody dies, and there's maybe like 60 of those life transitions that you can identify. The birth of your first child, graduating college, could be the death of a spouse. Some of them are, maybe not fun. And you can't really have a goal. Like you're not going to wake up and say, well, my goal is to experience a tragedy this year. I mean, that's no fun. So I think you've got to have goals and quantify those goals so that you know what you're aiming your financial resources towards. But you also have to just recognize that these transitions are going to happen. Like Brad, your kids are going to leave your house, God willing, someday to go do whatever they're going to do. Your goal for them may be for them to get a great education at Michigan State University and to thrive in the accounting field as their parents have. Okay, but the transition is going to happen one way or the other. So quantifying goals, and then I think using resources, tools, IRAs, 529 plans, insurances, etc., to really get you closer and closer to those goals, so that you can actually accomplish some cool stuff.
Love it. It's a great definition, and I think it's perfectly said in terms of kind of what it really means, especially from somebody who's gone through this mentally on our end. So, all right, so let's step back then and look at a small business owner starting a business, wants to start a family, doesn't have a lot of money, ready to put in the 60-hour work to make their work, their business grow. Like, when they come to somebody like you, what do you talk to them about?
Well, I wish that more people came to us before they, launch a business. Usually it's sort of like, hey, I started this thing a few years ago and now it's finally doing well, and now I've got some, wiggle room in my budget, or I've got some excess cash, and it might be time for me to, start a Roth IRA, and away you go. It would be probably more comfortable for the person starting the business if they just simply thought of, what does it take for my family to live the way that we, you know, like to live? Right? I mean, certainly to know what your, requirements are. I mean, you've got to live somewhere and you've got to eat something. You're right. You sort of know that fundamentally. But I think if you figured out, all right, it costs our family $5,000 a month to just survive, to kind of get by. And I'm in, let's say, hypothetically, I'm in an employment role right now where I have, a salary, and I'm moving into a job that I work for myself, and the salary is going to be based on the profitability of the business, right? Like, we don't know when the business is necessarily going to be profitable, and it sure might not be 6 months in. Hopefully, it's 12 months, 18 months in. But I'd figure out, okay, I need $5,000 a month to like pay my bills and keep the wheels on the bus. I'd want to have a couple of years, if possible, of those expenses somewhere, right? So I think sometimes people will start a business, and maybe they even put pressure on their potential customer base or their themselves, um, to grow maybe faster than is comfortable, because they don't have a contingency plan. They don't have a plan B, right? So like if I was going to go and start a new gig, and I was going off into a land where there's no guaranteed revenue, I mean, I'd want to have a big chunk of cash that's just there, and there as an emergency, account, both for the family, right, and just for the business, right. I mean, sometimes you start a business and you realize, oh, I guess these people need laptops, or they can't like do their job, right. So like you got to think about some of those things in advance, and I think that that would be like a great starting point. Also, if you were working for a large employer, like maybe you're working at an accounting firm and you're starting to think, well, I'm gonna break off and kind of start my own gig. You got to think about what sorts of benefits you are leaving behind, right? Health insurance, a retirement plan, stuff like that. Maybe disability income protection. Um, and not all employers have that, but like the big ones typically do. So once a year in like November, you sit down, you pick on the PDF what dental coverage you want or whatever. Like when you're going to own your own business, you don't have that. Like you have to be the HR department also, and you got to really think about what kind of gaps might be opening up here that I need to address. But I think it's the cash is the most important thing,
100%, 100%. So if we do have cash, or if cash does exist, right, as just living in a world where you have businesses, or a business, you have employees, you have a house, a mortgage, you have a spouse, a kid on the way, or two on the way, or or want one in the future. What are the risks and the types of insurances that you discuss and educate your clients on that can help offset if something bad does happen, and how should people view that?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I mean, even if you're just completely single and you're on your own, let's say you're used to making like $100,000 a year and you're going to break away and start your own business. Obviously, you got to have some kind of health insurance protection, right? And if you're healthy, you could have like a high deductible plan with an HSA and blah, 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 blah. But, you know, even if you're single, you might not need life insurance, or frankly want life insurance. Might be kind of a waste of money. I think disability income protection is really critical, right? So if you're not able to work because you're sick, or you've got some kind of disease or disorder or something, or an accident, which would be unlikely but still possible, yeah, you can get some disability income protection. It's not expensive, but if you can't work, you need to have some kind of cash flow, even if it's just you. Now, if you've got a family, spouse, kid or two, that kind of thing, you life insurance is probably something worth considering. Although, there are all these like rules of thumb. You always have this, or you never have that, and I think it's more subjective, right? It's sort of like, well, if I die, what do I want the world to be like for my family? That is a very subjective thing, right? There's no formula that's like you are required to carry X amount of insurance. But if you're going to make $100,000 a year and you're going to buy $1 million of term life insurance, is probably like $50 a month. I mean, it's very, very inexpensive to have these kind of basic things, but some of those things are what I was referring to earlier, provided by your employer. So it's like you don't even really have to think about it. Well, when you go and you break away and you're on your own, you got to figure out, how do I do accounting stuff? What kind of legal needs do I have, right? And the insurance piece is something that I think is part of a plan. But those are the big ones, health insurance, life insurance, disability insurance. Those are the kind of things that I would, just at least have like a gut check on, like, what is my risk here? Like, what is my contingency plan? And, if you got a mortgage and a spouse that's not working, um, taking care of your children, for instance, whatever it is, you got to think about what happens if my income goes away, and how might it go away? Well, one is you don't do a very good job running your business and you're not profitable, sure, but you could also have something happen to you that's completely unforeseen. It's not your fault. You could get hit by a car. You could die. I mean, it's scary, morbid stuff. We try to not start there, by the way, with our clients these days. My Northwestern Mutual background always has this, solve your risk-based needs first. But when we're talking to folks, we don't start with like, hey, real quick, Brad, before, what if you die? Like, let's start with like, let's hope that the business pans out and does well. But those insurances are very, very, very inexpensive, and it seems like it makes sense to kind of cover those foundational risks before you, for instance, save money in a 401k. That's
Yeah.
that's my take anyway.
Yeah, and that's kind of where like my head was going to as part of this topic, just from like our conversations and my experiences, as we've had conversations on this, and like from one, health insurance, clearly life insurance, those things are kind of always talked about, but I felt like disability insurance never really was talked about or as much that big of a deal.
Yeah.
But through our conversations, it's like it's higher um, probability to become disabled versus like dying, and what is your coverage for that? And then on top of that, there is disability like overhead expense coverage that you can get for your business in case you become disabled for a temporary time and you have to find somebody to fill in your specific role, especially as a business owner, to keep the business operating. So there's even conversations that you can have with your insurance folks or your financial planners about those topics as well. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
yeah, and I think if you've got, I think about it sort of like who would help me with this thing, right? So like my bookkeeping, I work with Accountfully, and it's fantastic, right? Like I don't want to have to do that. I don't want to mess it up. So when you think about financial planning, I sort of think about you've got, um, so there's a tax component, an accounting component. There's sort of a legal seat. Well, those two, things are very different, right? So you're going to ask, tax questions to your tax people. You're going to ask legal questions to your lawyer. On the financial planning side of things, I think you can have a financial advisor without having insurance, without having investments, to give you advice about things like having the proper cash reserves and so on and so forth. But then you probably eventually will have someone sit in that risk management seat, that insurance seat, if you will. And your insurance needs change all the time, right? Like if you've got a bunch of money in an account from Uncle Bill who died, you need less insurance than if you don't have Uncle Bill's money, right? So someone that can sit at the table and just kind of like explore what are the gaps that exist, and making sure those gaps don't open back up as your lifestyle changes. You may need to think about heavier coverages. Same with investments, right?
Yeah.
So when it comes to like, hey, we've got some money now, we can set it aside outside of the business and maybe create some liquidity that's not correlated to the success of the entity. Yeah, set up a 401k, have some, savings that have a little higher risk tolerance to get a better return. And you could have like one person sit in all of those seats, which is frankly what we hope to do for our folks.
Um, that's good. And kind of now, as we talked about the infrastructure and kind of the base kind of needs you need just to, from a more of a risk perspective, as the company grows 2 or 3 or 4 years down the road and there's cash, there's profits, there's now 10 to 15 people who are now asking about not just, medical benefits, but also 401ks and things like this. So maybe like two kind of questions and topics for you. Number one is, as a business owner who becomes more and more successful, has profits, has cash, etc., what should they think about personally more so? And then on the other end, like what are things you should do as a business owner, possibly for your company or your employees, from more of a retirement plan and things like that. So you can go kind of whatever way you
Yeah.
want to talk
Well,
about.
that's interesting way to think about it in those two ways, because I think they're like very, very intimately connected, right? Like it's like the good news and the bad news of owning your own business is that you get to and have to make all of the decisions about things like benefits, right? So when it comes to your benefits package, though, if you're like, well, our folks really want to have a retirement plan, right? Well, you can install a 401k, for instance. Everybody's heard that term. There are other ones too, but let's just use a 401k because it's the most common one. But you can offer a plan to your employees where they can defer their compensation. You can even use a Roth 401k and so on and so forth. But when you're designing like the plan description of what options does our retirement package come with, you as the person that owns the company gets to decide what that match is. You get to decide what the investment options are. You get to decide how the vesting works, and that includes your dollars that you save. So if you got some cash, let's say you're in your like late 30s, early 40s, you're sort of like, man, I should have been saving a little money for retirement this whole time. And you have a bunch of great employees that you really want to stick around and you want to give them a really nice benefit. That can benefit you and the employees at the same time because you can sock away, $30,000 a year, something like that, in your 401k, and then give yourself a match. And then you can do the same for your employees, right? Now, and there are caps on these types of plans, of course, right? And they change every year a little bit. Hard to remember what they are from year to year, frankly. But, you know, if you're earning, $200,000 a year, a 401k probably will give you all the headroom you need to save money for retirement. If you're making $2 million a year, it probably won't, right? And that again goes back to like quantified goals. If you're thinking, well, I want to retire when I'm 60, and you say, well, okay, you need to save 10% of your income. It's a lot easier to figure out strategies to save 10% of your income when you make $200,000 a year than it is when you make $2 million a year, because you run out of room in those qualified plans and those IRAs, things like that, like a lot faster. So that's when you have to look at like alternative ways to accumulate money, in kind of non-retirement formats. And that could be in a large lump sum. It could be in, annual or monthly contributions. You look at things like taxable investment accounts. You look at things like even like overfunding permanent life insurance, stuff like that. But you really are only doing that, in my opinion, if you've quantified goals and you've used all of the most efficient tax strategies like IRAs and Roth IRAs and all of that. Once you've done that and you've got that kind of like stake in the ground for your own retirement, you're also going to be way better at helping your employees take advantage of the plan that you provided them for themselves and their families. And, providing that type of benefit, whether it's a retirement plan or, ancillary insurances, whatever, and then knowing how those work and how they can benefit your employees, I think actually comes back and helps you, the business owner, be more profitable because you've got better human resources. Your people are better. They're happier, right? They're saving money. You're watching out for them. You're helping them, set themselves up for their own financial goals, right? So there's all kinds of stuff you can do to save, or you just go buy some like, Bitcoin or whatever you want and, talk about it at the bar like every other person around here.
Perfect. Moving on to the next kind of, you talk transitions, right? Where we're talking kids, houses, whatever else that kind of comes into play. But a big transition from a business owner could be selling your business and what that means. So, how do you kind of chat with your clients or prospective clients who are kind of nearing that time or have that, into their plan or are going to execute on that in the short term?
Yeah, that's a great question too. And, you know, I think that a lot of people that own businesses, maybe maybe it's less about like the tactics, right? Like surely there are like legal ramifications, like what is the agreement to sell the business, right? There are tax ramifications, like how is this taxed if I sell my business? Like that tactical stuff sort of seems like it's like just sort of known to be complicated. So you got to go out and you got to, you know, find good people to help you, navigate that. Again, accounting stuff, legal stuff, financial planning, whatever. But I think it's way more important to figure out like, well, what does this mean? Like, what are we trying to accomplish by having this transaction go through? It's like I'm going to sell my business. That, in a nutshell, doesn't that doesn't mean that it's good or bad, right? But if you're earning $250,000 a year and you're selling your business for $10 million, you're probably going to be able to replace your $250,000 a year pretty easily with some boring mutual funds and investments that are just generating return. Well, I would like to talk about that at least conceptually before we go out and try to piece together a deal to sell this business. Or it could be that you're selling your business, but you're like 45 years old and you don't want to like stop working. You might want to start another business. So the way that you would like approach, I think, that transition is what does that transition mean in terms of your lifestyle? Like, what does that mean? Like, is this like I won the lotto, I can't believe I sold this widget for, $1 billion? Or is it like, well, I don't know, I sold my business and now I got to find something else to do. So start there. And then once you know like what that means, like I sold my business and so I'm going to live in Italy, like that's a different conversation than, I had to sell it because I had a health event, or, I had to take care of my parents and they live, in, Indiana, or whatever it is. Right.
Love it. Best practices in terms of working with somebody like you, like at that point, or as you kind of near, more of a mature kind of relationship with a financial planner, like annual updates, 5-year updates, when the transitions happen, like should somebody like on my side of the table do or expect from somebody like yourself?
Yeah. It seems like if you're in sort of the antiquated investment forward financial advisor role, it's like you're talking to this person like once a quarter about, what did your investment portfolio do? And like, to me, that's not really financial planning at all. It might be, a worthwhile conversation to have in terms of what is our investment strategy? How are we pivoting based on big sort of events, volatility, et cetera? Sure. Or you might just like that conversation, might be interesting. In terms of like a business exit strategy, like a large transaction feels like it's going to happen in the next few years. Okay. I think if you're meeting uh, well in advance of even like accepting an offer, or even soliciting an offer to sell your business, it'll allow you to think like, what does this mean for our family first, and then does the sale price get us what we want? So I think if you have like a really great financial plan overlay where you've got your income, your expenses, you've got your assets, your liabilities, you've got all that stuff mapped out, and it's sort of like, here's my path forward. And you've already talked about all the different transitions that you want to address. Like, how are you going to help your kids with their education expenses? When do you want to be, you know, capable of just not working and having like, mailbox money or just regular income without, a lot of like effort, right? If you do all that stuff, it really allows you to poke at that plan and say, well, what if I sold my business and I got $2.5 million? Like, would that help this plan? Would it hurt this plan? And so I think if you have that foundationally um, sort of structured in advance, it's going to allow you to really see what kind of variables might exist. It's like if you're taking a road trip and you're like, well, we're going to California, we need to be there in a month. You've got tons of time to stop at other places, but if you're going to California, you need to be there like 2 days from now. Like it might not even, you might need to get a plane ticket instead of trying to drive your Ford Bronco out there. Okay, like yeah. So I think you got to have some kind of roadmap, but the map is allowed to be like a Google map, right? Um, it's not like 1995. They printed out like a 3-ring binder and they're like, here's your plan. And that the plan changes, man. It's Google Map, right? There's a wreck ahead and you want to get off, or there's a ways, like there's a cop over there, like that kind of stuff. So I think that if you know what the transaction is going to be and you know that you want to do it, but then you're trying to backfill with like, what does this mean? That's okay too. I think it's just better um you know planning. It's just better sort of, I don't know, it's just easier if you already have a plan and then you say like, how does this event affect my plan, as opposed to this event has become my plan. You know what I mean?
Hmm. All that makes sense. One last question before we kind of go to the final couple topics here. A lot of people think wealth managers, financial planners, tax people are the same people, talk to each other all the time. They both know everything. You're my tax guy, knows what I should do in financial planning. My financial planning guy tells me to do these things on the tax side of things. How does it work in kind of real life from kind of what you do versus the tax person? And then what's the best kind of solution just from like an integration and working together for your clients.
Is that not how it works? I thought that, I mean, don't you just do it the same thing I do? I think, like maybe even 3 or 4 years ago, I was like, I should know like a bunch of tax and legal stuff. And then that way I can like give advice about those areas, at least in the um, context of the financial plan. And man, I think differently now. I think more that like I would rather be hyper focused on the things that I know I'm competent with and good at. And man, like every recommendation that we make that has a tax like flavor to it, uh, we are going to put that in front of our client's CPA, right? Because if you implement a Roth conversion in April, like of 2024, and the family doesn't file their 2024 tax return until like, the summer of 2025, they have long forgotten that like up like front loading the tax on this IRA was a really good strategy, because 18 months from now all they're going to see is like, what on earth is this $35,000 tax bill from, right? So we want the CPA that our client is working with, many times that's someone with Accountfully, by the way. We want that person on the tax team to look at the recommendation that we are making before the client implements it. And I think that our clients really appreciate that. And I know that our client's CPA appreciates that because they don't like surprises, right? No one likes a tax surprise. I'd say it's kind of the same thing in terms of like legal stuff. Like if we're titling an account, instead of using an individual account, maybe you want to use a trust account. Well, if you have a good estate planning attorney and you've got those documents in place, this is like an email chain. This is not like it takes a tremendous amount of time and energy, right? So we just have everybody on an email, and then we keep track of those emails in our CRM so that we can look back and see, how did we make this decision? Who said like, yeah, it sounds like a good deal, right? And I will say this is not like beat up on CPA time, okay? But CPAs really, really like to get the lowest possible tax outcome in the year that they're working on, like right now. Of course they do. Like that is in fact their job, right? Sometimes though, things like a Roth contribution versus a traditional IRA contribution are like objectively way better for the plan given these quantified goals. And I think that before we even make more complicated strategy recommendations like those Roth conversions or whatever it is, a cash balance pension plan, blah, 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 doesn't matter. Whatever that thing is, before we even get to making recommendations, we want the CPA that our client has hired to look at the financial plan so that they know where our recommendations are coming from, right? It's not just like I don't know, this seems like a good move, you should do it. It's like, well, this helps you progress towards your goal. And so I like collaborating with the CPA. And sometimes they just like completely let us off the hook of having to explain all the benefits of the strategy. Okay.
Yeah, I think just from our aspect of from the accounting kind of CPA aspect of proactive conversations with our clients, number one, and having our clients being proactive in general is the start. Number two is then if you have other people involved, like Heath, get them involved on various topics that we need to talk about. The more that you collaborate and everybody understands kind of what we're doing moving forward, it's going to be a much better process for everybody, which is great. So this was all awesome information. I loved it, Heath. I think it's going to be very good for the audience. Before we leave,
I love you too, Brad. Is that?
there you go.
Did you
There
say
you go.
you love me? I love you. Okay.
You know,
We love each other.
exactly. So two last questions. Number one, if you're that small business owner, if we go back to having 5 employees, what is the biggest do that they should be focusing on from their perspective?
That's a great question. It's such a boring thing. This is like, I remember taking the CFP exam like years and years and years ago. And one of the like study hacks was like, if you see that like one of the multiple choice questions is like, you know, uh, address custodial arrangements for children, like that's the answer, which just sounds so random. That's what I'm saying here, but like the um the basics of financial planning, estate planning, tax planning are kind of boring, but people skip them all of the time. And so not having enough cash reserves is like a huge gap. Um, you know, I think if you are set up on a regular monthly savings plan for literally any goal that you can imagine, it just it makes other financial planning easier, right? If you're saving 5 grand a month and you don't really know why, and then you have an opportunity to buy like a second home and you figure out that the mortgage is going to be $3,000 a month, like great news, you can afford the second house. Like you already know that. So I would say that it's to assemble a team of people that you've got really, really good communication vibes with. Like these people respond to my emails. If I call this person and have a question, they call me back. Like you want to have people that can sit in those seats that if you really need to figure something out, they know you enough to be able to give you a quick answer so that you can move on with your day, right? Because when you're a new entrepreneur, like even in the first 5 years, there's just a lot of new things that you have to get good at fast. And whether it's tax or payroll or blah blah blah, there's just a billion different things. I'd rather have really great people that I trust, that I've got good relationships with, that I can bounce things off of quickly, right? So it's not so much a tactical thing. Maybe this isn't a good answer. I would just like get people at the table that you think are going to give you objective, good advice that's in your best interest.
Perfect. I don't think there's any bad answer there. I think that was awesome. And then what, on the other aspect, what is one don't?
One don't. I think that you don't just assume that plan A is going to work. You have to have like a ripcord. Like it's okay that your business didn't work, right? Like think of all the entrepreneurs that you see on social media who are like, they're like this like godly creature that has this amazing business. Like I'll bet you if you went and looked at their like track record, that they had some other things that maybe like didn't work out. And so I would have a plan B. I would have like this didn't work, and it's okay if it didn't work right now or it didn't work the exact way that you wanted it. But I think that and that's not like a that's not like a doomsday, like don't even bother starting a business, it's just not going to work. That's not what I mean. What I mean is you have to have like some um game plan to gauge whether or not your business is actually going to succeed or not, right? uh just have watched people even in my industry where they really like the idea of being a financial advisor, right? But like it's just not great timing in their life, or maybe they didn't have enough cash or a good backup plan. And so what they are delivering starts to become, maybe it's questionable advice that they're doing. Or if you're like a product manufacturer, maybe like you start to cut corners on your product, and this thing that you really liked that you wanted to like manufacture and put out into the world, all of a sudden is like kind of a crappy version of this thing because you're like having to cut corners, right?
Mm-hmm.
Brad, you've owned other businesses. You had like gas powered scooters, which were super fun, by the way, right?
That I
You still have
realized,
any of those?
no.
Yeah, of course not, right? So it's like, yeah, this thing could have been cool. It could have been like, I don't know, a different, like Uber before Uber existed or something. It's actually a really clever deal, but it's like, I don't know, it didn't work. So you just do something different, and Accountfully is like a smash hit.
I,
So
I realized that I was better at accounting than that. So anyway, but this is awesome. Heath, I loved your last two answers to the questions. Thanks for the time. Awesome information. Where can people find you?
people can find me if they just ask you for my cell phone number. You can also go to berawealth.com, BERA, berawealth.com. And, still affiliated with Northwestern Mutual, or just email me at heath.johnson@nm.com.
Awesome. All right, Heath. That was episode 5 of the Accountfully chat. Heath Johnson. Thanks again, bud.
Thanks, Brad.